Hey out there, rock and rollers. Welcome to the 146th edition of the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast, brought to you by me, your host, Mac B. the Wolf, and I will be joined, as usual, by my partner in crime from the East Coast of the United States of America, Gary Action Jackson. And we appreciate everybody tuning in last week to our interview with Jim McCarty, the legendary Yardbirds drummer who is a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, talking about his new single, Breath of the Wind, and sharing some fun anecdotes about his days with the Yardbirds in the 60s. We really appreciate him. Such a gentleman. And his single, Breath of the Wind, is out September 15th. So be sure everybody go out and have a listen to that. Download it. Buy it. Good man. Great song. And it was a great show. We really appreciate having him on. This week, we return to our album review roots. You know, we like to do albums having big anniversaries. And so this week, we tackle one we probably wouldn't have done a few years back. Because if you look over our list of shows, you can see it's very hard rock, heavy metal focused. But we've also got a pretty nice chunk of prog rock, progressive rock, bands that we might have known when we were young in the 80s, but they were different from when they were big in the 70s. Talking about bands like Yes and Genesis. Of course, we've had Steve Hackett on the show, and in the last decade, I personally have gotten more into the 70s Peter Gabriel and Steve Hackett era Genesis songs, and all of prog, really. Of course, Pink Floyd was huge for us growing up. Maybe a little different in the 80s when we saw them on MTV than they were in the 70s. But as fans, we eventually made those connections, and now we appreciate the prog foundations that they laid in the 70s, which then allowed them to maybe shift gears a little bit, be more pop in the 80s. Well, in 1983, Genesis released their self-titled album, Genesis, which was the follow-up to Abacab. But at the same time, Phil Collins, who joined the band in the early 70s as the drummer, and now is the singer after the departure of Peter Gabriel, is having a huge solo career of his own. His Face Value album in 1980 does very well, and Hello, I Must Be Going, which preceded this Genesis 1983 album, also did incredibly well. Now, after 1983, and the Genesis album sold very well, 4 million in the US, more than 8 million worldwide. The biggest success was still yet to come. Built on the success of this album and Phil's previous solo albums, he then did No Jacket Required, an enormous selling record, 25 million worldwide. And then Genesis would do Invisible Touch, which would be about their biggest selling album of all time. 15 to 20 million maybe worldwide over the years. That's a huge run they're on. And so this is an interesting album in that it's kind of where Jackson and I came in. The song That's All was big on MTV and the radio when we were kids. And it's kind of our first understanding of who Genesis really were. And then by the time they got to Invisible Touch, we were aware. Obviously, we're aware who Phil Collins was because he would be everywhere during this time. And that's both a positive and a negative for the band. But we're going to get into all that here as we talk about the Genesis 1983 album. First, we've got just a little bit of business to take care of. As usual, we like to remind you that we are proud members of the Pantheon Podcast Network, a network of about 100 different shows, all musical related. Not everything's hard rock, not everything's rock and roll. There really is something in there for everybody, so I encourage you to go check it out at pantheonpodcast.com or follow them on socials at pantheonpods. But we have to recommend, guys, that you go visit our sponsor, rarevinyl.com. They're based in the UK. They got 250,000 records and other great music memorabilia items in stock. They ship all over the world. They've got a 5-star rating from Trustpilot, and they're good folks. I've visited their warehouse. I've met all their people. They do an amazing job procuring and taking care of these records, archiving them, and then getting them to you in great shape. So you go there, find something that you love, and then you can use code UGLY, UGLY, to save 10% off your orders. And that's a one-time code, so don't just go buy one $8 easy-to-find single. Go find a lot of special things. Save yourself some good money. It's rarevinyl.com. Use that code UGLY. Now back to Genesis. Yeah, I admit I wasn't a hard rocker when I was 10 when this album came out in October of 1983. I was learning about music. I was watching MTV, and this would come on. And I think that's part of why Phil became such a big star, because suddenly singers and pop stars, they weren't just musical performers. They had to be actors as well. And Phil had that. He went to drama school, and he was obviously a bit of a ham. He's also a pretty self-effacing guy, it would seem on the surface. You know, he's not afraid to play a role in a 3 or 4 minute music video. And I think that just helped him skyrocket. And then the music industry just said, ooh, this guy works. Let's put him in everything. Some of that has led to a lot of Phil backlash. But I got to tell you, the guy worked very hard during this time, and he got a lot of success out of it. And this album has some good stuff on it. Some of the singles I didn't love, some of it's a little adult contemporary, but with Home by the Sea and Second Home by the Sea, they still have some prog in them. And you're familiar with almost every song on the album because it was a single or they played it on the radio. So we decided as it turns 40, we're going to dive into Genesis' self-titled 1983 record right here on The Wolf. Well, I guess it's time to talk about Genesis.
All right.
Which we've done before.
Mm-hmm.
But we've always talked about prog superstar Genesis with Peter Gabriel and Steve Hackett. We have never talked about big MTV pop superstar Genesis before.
Mm-hmm.
And this one, I don't know. I mean, I think we were both keen to do it, but I think you suggested this one way back when we knew it was going to be turning 40 this year.
Yeah.
Why did you say, hey, let's go ahead and take a hard look at this one?
I think for a couple of different reasons. This was one of the first videos I remember seeing in heavy rotation on MTV, that's all video.
Mm-hmm.
And then in thinking about how if you came into this band when we did, you would never know that they had started off as something very different. The same way, 90125 came out the same year for Yes, and that was the same deal. You'd thought, oh yeah, these guys they're a pop band from England. No, they're not at all. They are now, but they weren't before. But yeah, I mean, this album was all over the place, and then to me, it just kind of bled into No Jacket Required in '85, and so I mean, for a run of about a good 10 years, Phil Collins was all over MTV. Like you could not get rid of him, and then that went into movie roles and TV roles. And so, this album was, I won't say it's one of my favorites, but it's definitely, you definitely can't escape the legacy of this thing.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And you're right about That's All. I mean, I remember hearing That's All on the radio, and I think I even recorded on, like, I get a cassette, and not even like a nice Maxell cassette. I'm talking like a 69-cent, like, got it at Target in a pack of like 6 cassettes. But then, if you had a stereo, that had an amp and had a radio, the FM radio, then you could record random songs off the radio if you timed it right,
Yeah.
And I remember specifically recording this one, didn't really know Genesis, didn't obviously know who they were before the 80s or before 78 when they did. And then there were the 3 album with the first Follow You, Follow Me, when they kind of started to make that hard transition from being the prog band with the 20-minute songs to being more of a 4-minute pop band.
Mm.
Obviously, had no idea. When I saw Shock the Monkey, on MTV, I didn't think, oh, well, here's Peter Gabriel, who used to be in Genesis. No idea. He's just some guy named Peter Gabriel. I had no clue about any of this when I'm like 9, 10 years old. And honestly, as I'm sure we've talked on this show before, probably on our Hackett shows that we did number 5 and number 6 almost 3 years ago now. Hard to believe. Didn't realize that Peter Gabriel and Steve Hackett were in the band, or that they had all this great, incredibly intricate and cool music. I mean, I didn't really know that till I was 30 or so. Like, I guess I knew that Peter Gabriel had been in Genesis, but I didn't hear any of it until I was much older.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same. I mean, I didn't catch up with Peter Gabriel until So came out. And then it was kind of like, oh, that he was in Genesis before he left,
right,
in the late 70s, and yeah, I mean, or mid 70s, I guess, and just had no clue that they had put this stuff together, no clue that they had these records out, because there really isn't anything from those records that was on the radio. I mean, like, Yes had, like, they had Roundabout and stuff like that. So you had heard that, but you hadn't heard the record. There really isn't anything on American radio from those old, or from the true prog albums.
You're right about that. And remember, we had Carl Palmer on the show, and he's like, in the 70s in America, it was brilliant. You could get anything on the radio. You got a 12-minute suite that has like chimes and stuff in it. There's an American DJ somewhere who will put that on FM radio. But as soon as we got to 82 and we made Asia, they're like, you got to cut all that stuff out. And it's AOR and it's, 4 minutes at the most, kind of thing. And Genesis, although they always kind of had at least one long song on every album, they did the same thing. And yeah, you're right. Yes, Owner of the Lonely Heart, which is also turning 40, which we may just get to 90125 before the end of the year here. Genesis was doing the same thing. We're going to have these pop. Well, plus it changed. Without Peter Gabriel, they didn't have these necessarily these long, huge stories anymore. Without Steve Hackett, you didn't have to have room for incredible guitar work and Tony's piano playing. But they also always kind of made room for others to do solo albums. I mean, Steve Hackett had done a solo album. Tony Banks' first solo album was in 79 and then there were 3. The album came out. Everybody kind of worked on each other's solo albums, like Phil played on Steve's solo album and stuff like that. So, they kind of had the main band, but it seemed like there was enough space for people to do other things. Now, nobody knew that Phil Collins was going to have this extraordinary solo career. And when we do one of these album reviews, we always like to talk about, okay, where was the band before, leading up to this? So yeah, we talk about in 78, all of a sudden they get a little bit pop there. And in 81, they released Abacab, which was a pretty big hit for them and had some big tracks they played basically to the day. I mean, it had No Reply at All on it. Abacab, although no one knows exactly what it means, it was still a pretty big hit for them. And they've been working with Hugh Padgham, who worked with Dire Straits and who's, an incredibly strong producer. A lot of times it was just produced by Genesis, but now like, okay, we're going to work with Hugh and make sure that, we kind of keep this going in the right direction kind of thing. So they done Duke and then they did Abacab, but see, at the same time, Phil Collins is creating this solo career, right? And let's see here. Phil's first album, was that 1980?
80 or 81, I think.
No, Face Value was 1981. Okay. So 81, they did both Abacab, which was a million seller or whatever. Plus Phil did early in 81, he did Face Value, which included In the Air Tonight and Missed Again. And how many did it sell? I mean, like 10 million? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it was a big hit then. And then he put out
Hello, I Must Be Going.
Correct. Right. Which wasn't as big, but still didn't do too shabby. So you wonder if at this point in time, had the dynamic of the band changed any?
Well, and the answer is kind of yes. I mean, I see 5 million in the US, 12 million. It was 12 million worldwide. Goodness, for Face Value. And then 81, they do, the Abacab and the tour, and then Phil goes back to Hello, I Must Be Going, and he's got Can't Hurry Love on there, and you've got Don't Care Anymore, which, obviously it's not as big as In the Air Tonight, but I've got 3 million in the US, and it's probably about 7 or 8 million around the world. So not so bad to be Phil Collins there. So it was like, we're going to take 8 months off from Genesis. And in that time, he worked on Robert Plant's album, and he did the Philip Bailey song Easy Lover. And then he put out his own thing, which was also produced by Hugh Padgham, so it's like Phil, people like to give Phil a hard time, but Phil wasn't letting any grass grow under his feet. Phil was working pretty hard in these days, and it was obviously paying off for him.
Right. And usually that's kind of a one-off subject. When somebody from a big band does a solo record, it's usually like some kind of passion project, and you're not going to sell a ton of copies, but you want to do something a little different. This was not that at all. These were huge successes. This was not, Bill Wyman's Monkey Grip.
Right. Exactly. But then, I remember seeing a thing on Fleetwood Mac with Stevie Nicks. He's like, okay, well, I'm going to go do a solo album. But if it does really badly, that could hurt the band. But if it does too well, that could hurt the band, because then everyone's like, well, Stevie's this star, kind of thing. And I think that's what kind of was happening here. No Jacket Required hadn't come out quite yet, but then like to kind of keep the Genesis thing going in 82, because they didn't have a tour in 82 and they didn't have an album release. They released a 3x3 EP called 3x3, and it had the song Paper Laid. Remember that song, Paper Laid?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember, this is weird because it wasn't on an album, but but there it is. It's from 1982. It got into the charts. They also did 3 sides live, where they had exactly what it says there, 3 sides live from over the years. And I think they even had a little bit of from the Steve Hackett days on there. It's like most of it was like 80 and 81, but I think some of it went back to even 76, when Steve was still in the band. And then on side 4, they threw it, at least on the U.S. side, they threw in Paper Late and everything from 3x3. Plus, they put on a couple of B-sides. Evidence of Autumn was a Banks composition that was on the B-side of Turn It On Again in the U.S. and on the B-side of Misunderstanding the U.K. And then Open Door was the B-side to Duchess. So that was side 4 of this double album that they put out. So kind of like Kiss Alive 2, where the first 3 sides were live, and then the last one said studio stuff on it. So, and that's a double live album, and it went gold, right? So Genesis is they've kind of got this thing going. They don't want to stop, but they have to make room for Phil's solo act, which is becoming bigger. But I mean, to his credit, he's not really letting it ruin Genesis.
Right, because he does. They make this record, then he does No Jacket Required, then they do Invisible Touch, which is huge, and a huge tour. So yeah, he was the one that could bridge both of those two worlds, live in both of them, and be successful. And I guess the other guys were okay with that, and they knew that Genesis was their thing. But they're English too, so who knows? Because I've tried to watch a whole bunch of interviews with them to see, and it didn't seem like there was any animosity, but you never know.
Well, hard to get a read off Tony, man. I mean, talk about the kind of typical English, no emotion there, like,
right.
Smile, Tony. You've sold 100 million records or something like that. Even at his second to last show ever with Genesis in the O2, when they're kind of introducing everyone around, and, Mike might not show his teeth, but he'll smile and wave to the crowd. Tony's just standing there stoically, And I even said it. I'm like, smile, you sack. You're rich and famous. You can't get it from him. Very, very English. But even he was trying his hand at solo records. I mean, he had one in 79, I think it was, called A Curious Feeling. In 83, before Genesis, the self-titled Genesis album comes out, he releases The Fugitive, which I don't think went anywhere in America. It probably charted in England. No, it says peak position 50. So,
So no.
So no, they're like, just do something with Phil Collins, won't you? Yeah, that probably pissed Tony off a little bit. But, the thing is, the change had happened. Like, everyone used to have their own writing credits. And then on this one, part of the reason they called it Genesis self-titled was because they did, all the writing credits were shared by the guys. At least all the music was. We find out later, like, who wrote the lyrics. So I don't know if that means they decided we're going to share all writing credits 33, 33, 33. Or did they say, all right, we'll all get like 1/6, right? Because basically, when it comes to writing credits, it's half music and half lyrics, right? Like to ASCAP and that kind of thing, it's 50% melody and 50% lyrics. So I don't know if that means they each get 1/6 of every song musically, 1/6 of the writing, and then whoever wrote the lyrics gets 50%. Or do they all get 25% of a song for the music, and then whoever wrote the lyrics gets that fourth 25%? I don't know. I don't know how they decided to do it. Maybe at this point they decided, you know what, let's just put it all 50-50-50 or 33 apiece. Figure it. Look, Phil's stuff is selling well with Genesis. It's selling well outside of Genesis. Why don't we all just get 1/3 of everything and make it easy? But I don't know.
Yeah, and one of the notes here was that they used to have stuff that they would bring in and then work on it, but that kind of led to people getting bent out of shape when you bring a song in and somebody says, well, what if you do it this way? No, this is my song. I want it done exactly the way that I want it done. In this scenario, it's more everybody's kind of working together to put the song together, so that I think there's less hurt feelings when people have different ideas.
Yeah, and that should help the camaraderie. Right. Plus, I mean, didn't they have The Farm now? They had like their own a place where it's like they had a recording studio, and it was a place kind of out in the country they could get away from. So you didn't necessarily have to come in with as much. You can go in there and start to ideate, which is a bullshit corporate word my wife taught me, but come up with stuff together and throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks there and kind of go from there.
We forget now with the everybody's got a laptop and Pro Tools and everything else. I mean, they used to spend thousands of dollars an hour for these big time recording studios. So yeah, you didn't want to just go in there and fool around. But if you had your own studio like this, you were a lot freer to experiment.
Yeah, and then if you want to make money or pay the taxes on the studio or whatever, fine, rent it out to other people when you're not there. But when you want to do something, then you've got, all the time in the world, right? So,
right.
Yeah, I've seen like them in a documentary or something like that, like riding their bikes, and I don't know if it's like from the main house to the recording house or whatever. I'm like, that seems lovely. Let's just take a bike ride to work, but it's not like a bike ride in the streets of London where you're like dodging buses and lorries and stuff like that and people walking on the wrong side. It's like, la, 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 la. Seems nice. The ideal English countryside, yes. But the songs that have endured are still the Collins lyrics, and then to a degree Banks. It seems like Rutherford was not, I don't know, it seems like his stuff wasn't appreciated as much. I mean, there's 9 songs in the album, and Rutherford did the lyrics for 4 of them. So he has more writing, like lyric writing, than anybody else. Collins only had 2. Hey, guess what? They're both singles, And then Tony Banks had some, and we're going to kind of get into all that. But then it wasn't so long after that, it was in 85, that he puts together Mike and the Mechanics, and they do Run Silent, Run Deep, and eventually does stuff like The Living Years, and he has a pretty big solo career. It's like, I think this might have pissed Tony Banks off, because Peter Gabriel went on to have a huge solo career, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame solo career. Steve Hackett, it may not be of huge recognition in America as a solo artist. However, he's made dozens of solo records and has a very loyal following, and he's touring the U.S. this fall. In fact, I feel like it's this month, or it's at least October coming up as we record this. Phil Collins becomes one of the biggest solo artists in the world. Mike has this really huge side project with Mike and the Mechanics. Tony continued to release albums, and I think they do okay in the UK, but they don't really go anywhere else. And I feel like that just made him a little, I write all this music for Genesis. I'm the one who screams the loudest and makes sure that my stuff, my riffs, my piano pieces are on all these songs. And yet I'm the only one who doesn't achieve the huge success away from the band.
Yeah. And even though you are stoic and you have that English sensibility about you, there has to be some part of you that's not happy with that. Or you think, why not me? Why do these other guys have success outside the band? And for whatever reason, the music that I make on my own doesn't resonate the same way.
And you can't say it's because he doesn't sing or he's not the main singer, because he does sing on, I think, on a lot of his songs. Steve Hackett didn't sing on his songs till very late in his career. He always had singers in for him. Mike, obviously famously had Paul Young and Paul Carrick in his band because he didn't sing, so it's not just because he wasn't a singer. So it's probably a little craw, and then he started to do some classical stuff, which did better than his pop stuff. So maybe that's like, well, yes, I'm a serious artist, I record classical music.
I don't put out silly songs.
Yes,
Hi, this is Steve Hackett, and you're listening to The Ugly American Werewolf in London.
But nevertheless, so yeah, this one sold, it was 4 million in the US alone, which is kind of amazing. Platinum in Germany and France and New Zealand, and double platinum in the UK. And so, I'm guessing it probably sold in the $7 to $8 million, 7 to 8 million copy range, something like that around the world. That's a pretty big deal. I mean, honestly, versus, say, what did Wind in the Wuthering sell, what did Selling England by the Pound sell? Especially in its first year. I mean, since it's kind of become a classic, but in 1972, 73, they weren't selling 8 million albums a year.
Right. And that's kind of the hard part for me too, going and doing research for this. You see the sales as of now, but you really wonder, when this record came out, or, even Abacab, do people go and work backwards from there and do the back catalog, get a huge bump from people discovering the band at that point in time.
Yeah, see, I'm kind of doubtful, because especially in America, I still to this day have never heard a Peter Gabriel era Genesis song on the radio. Not once in 50 years. Never in America.
I would probably say the same thing, and not that I remember.
But starting with Follow You, Follow Me, I've heard Genesis all over the place, and I've heard Peter Gabriel's solo stuff all over the place, but never have I heard kind of pre-Phil Collins as the lead singer Genesis on American radio ever.
Unless you're in one of those, freaky deep cuts, somebody's going on a journey and they throw something like that in there.
Right. And then I'm sure that they played it on the radio in the 70s when it was coming out new, and they're like promoting the album and they're promoting the tour, sure. But I don't really come into the radio till like 81 or 82. And then that's when classic rock radio just starts to become a thing. It was like in that early to mid 80s. Suddenly there's like, you know what? It doesn't have to be on the top 40 right now, but it was in the 70s or it was in the 60s. So we're going to play classic Stones or classic whatever, Eagles, on this station. And it'll be like, time stops. And maybe, and of course, when we were in high school and stuff, they had the best classic rock and today's rock. So you would hear stuff from the 60s, 70s, and then you'd hear the new hot rock and stuff that was in the charts in the 80s. Now, because it's so broad, you don't really have stations like that anymore. You have stations that have like 60s, 70s, and 80s, and then it stops. Or like my favorite, well, it was my old favorite, QMF 95.7. It was the rock station my entire life. I moved back. They still do 60. It's mostly 70s and 80s, but they do a lot of 90s now. And they do a ton. You would think Bon Jovi and Guns N' Roses were the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, the way they play them on this station. It's crazy. Plus, they have like that whole. They do have some grunge, which I don't like, but then they also kind of have that 90s. It's like bands that just aren't that good, like Limp Bizkit. I'm like, that counts as classic rock? You got to be kidding me. Those guys suck. Like Three Doors Down, fine. I like those guys, but that whole new metal nonsense, just ugh.
Unfortunately, if I think classic rock is, what's the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, 25 years after you put out your first record? So yeah, that does count as classic rock, unfortunately now.
Yeah, but it classically sucked then, and it sucks even worse now. That's what I say. Anyway, let's not go down that road. Let's get into Genesis' self-titled 1983 multi-platinum juggernaut. Not as big as Invisible Touch, but that's what's coming next, right?
Right, but I think this definitely opened the door for that, because I think when Invisible Touch came out, this was still played. The tracks here were still played on the radio, and you had the Phil Collins stuff. So yeah, this, well, not as big. I think this definitely kept the momentum going for them.
Absolutely it did. All right, so let's start with the first song, which was a single, and that's Mama.
Now, they made a video for this thing, but I don't ever remember seeing it.
I don't either. I mean, I think I saw it much later in life, kind of like when I got into Steve Hackett, from the when they did the BBC thing, Some of the Parts. So good, such a good. And I know Steve Hackett didn't like it because they didn't really talk much about his solo career. It was just really about the band. But that's what got me into Steve. So it can't be all bad, Steve. Come on, man. But anyway, so yeah, Mama. First single. It went to number 4 in the UK. And that is the highest a Genesis song has gone in the UK. I'm like, what? Really? This one? Because this is a weird one to me. It went to 5 in mainstream rock in the US, but it only went to 73 on the Billboard Top 100 because it's kind of an odd song. It's downbeat. Tony's kind of got the he's got the thing going, but it's kind of a dark song. B-side was It's Gonna Get Better, and it's got that weird it's very, very strange. It's not what you think of when you think Genesis.
in a weird way, weird that it was a single, but also weird that it was the first track on the record too. Because to me, it sounds like industrial before that was even a thing at the beginning, and it's got the weird video. And is this about him being in love with a prostitute or something, and she doesn't love him back or something? And then that the laughing part is odd. Although they did say it was weird because they thought he could never do it live, but apparently he could, no problem.
Yeah, and also on that some of the parts, he's talking about like he got that from Grandmaster Flash. He's like, and I'm like, yeah, okay, I see that with Grandmaster Flash. I recognize that. He's like, see, Genesis, Grandmaster Flash, putting it all together, aren't we? I'm like, no, you're not, man. That doesn't make any fucking sense. I don't get it.
Maybe to you, but no. Okay.
But they play it. They played it. I mean, they played it like on every tour they did basically after that. And I'm like, really? This one? This is just, I mean, you could substitute out so many other things for this. When I saw them on the last Domino tour, the second to last show they ever did, yeah, it was like the third song that they did on the night. And I'm like, this one? You know, it surprised me. But then I didn't know it was such a huge hit for them in England. And that changes things, right? I mean, Kiss plays the same set list every night in America. But when they go to England, they put in Crazy, Crazy Nights because that was a huge hit over there, minor hit over here. So Mama's a huge hit in the UK. That's where they're from. They care more about that than anywhere else. So it's like, okay, I get it. So I can say I saw them perform this song. I wasn't super psyched about it, but hey, but there it is. You know, it's special to them. It's important to them. And so they did it, but I don't like it. And it's long too. I mean, it's almost 7 minutes long. So that's not the single version. The single version's like half that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't, it's very, very bizarre. And if it was a huge hit for them, that's excellent. But yeah, I could skip over this one, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I'm with you. Actually, the single version wasn't half that. The single version was like just over 6 minutes, which is kind of surprising. The video was 5 minutes and change. And then they also had a long version, probably on like a 12-inch single that was like 7.5. I'm like, you make that longer? What for, dude? This is... And it's a song singing to a prostitute, and I'm like, ugh. All right, can we move along, please? Because that's compared to Duke and Abacab, like the songs are better on those, at least to start. Now you got the kind of bouncy, that's all piano piece. Both of these are Collins lyrics, these first two. And this one, I've liked it ever since I was a kid, and I still like it. I mean, it's, you know, released on Halloween, 1983. This one did pretty well on the charts. I mean, 6 Hot 100 in the U.S., 7 on Adult Contemporary, and it made it top 20 in the U.K. Got to 2 in Canada's Adult Contemporary. It did pretty well around the world.
Yeah. And I remember the video like it was yesterday. It was on pretty heavy rotation. I thought it was a little strange that you could do whatever you want, and they wanted to be hobos. And it was also like, these guys are rock stars? Okay. They look kind of old and not super. I mean, in 1983 as a child, they look old and not...
Right. I mean, compared
to me.
Michael Jackson and Duran Duran and Men at Work, it's like, no, these guys are grown-ups with kids. Like, you know, Duran Duran's like, I'm going to look like the guys in Duran Duran in about 7 years. Like, it's going to be a long time before I look like these guys, you know? Yeah.
But that piano intro, I mean, you play that 1 second, you know exactly what it is.
I'm wrong when I thought it was right. It's always the same, it's just a shame, that's all.
I always thought it was a little weird too with that electronic drum beat. And then when you figure out, wait a minute, Phil Collins was the drummer and he let them use that pre-programmed piece of garbage. Okay.
Well, you know, he's got to sing.
It works. And I understand that, yes, when they play live, he doesn't do the drumming. I just thought it was weird. But then there are real drums that come in.
Right.
About halfway through.
Right. And they played this a lot. They did not play it when I saw them. But, I mean, they could do so many different things. They've got so much that they could do. You can't really get super pissed off if they don't play. Oh, wait, that's not... They played it, but they played it differently. I'm sorry, I was wrong.
Okay.
It was like an acoustic thing.
Huh.
Without the kind of classic piano, without the classic drum. It was just a little different. I assume that there's going to be a live album and a DVD released of this last tour, although maybe they'll just do an album because, I mean, Phil looked half dead in the show. I mean, I joked it was the corpse of Phil Collins out there. He still had the attitude, but he had to sit and kind of hold his cane in his hand there. And I give him credit for belting it out and honoring, because this got delayed because of COVID, and his health kind of went down during that time. Plus, I'm pretty sure he was on some real pain meds, because when he was on like BBC, he kind of had that slur going on.
Oh boy,
that you hear from people who are taking a lot of pain meds, and I thought he sounded good, but he was also kind of a little ornery between some songs, and he's like, "Fuck Putin," everyone's like, "Yeah," I'm like, "Yeah, but dude, you don't need to say that. You don't need to say the F word in front of everybody." Yeah, but anyway, because they kind of had this. They did the first 9 or 10 songs, and then they kind of broke it down, because they had a couple keyboard players and they had backup singers, and then they kind of just broke it down. It was Phil, Tony comes up front to have a little small kind of electric piano play thing, Mike, and then Nick on the drums. Nick was excellent on the drums, by the way. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of nepotism in bands, like, oh yeah, we'll just put my kid in the band. Like, you could get someone better. I know you can. I mean, even though they've grown up listening to it, I know them. There's fine. You get someone better. No, I think Nick really did earn it and do a really good job. But they did That's All. They did Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which was a little surprising to me. And then they did Follow You, Follow Me, which of course I love. So They did those kind of in this stripped down, though. That was cool, but it wasn't exactly the same. But I remember as a kid listening to That's All. No big heavy guitars. Kind of surprised that I like it, but it must have been Phil's voice that was starting to become ubiquitous at this point.
Yeah, and you say that, and I was kind of thinking the same thing too. But if you go back and listen to it a couple of times, Rutherford is doing something a little tasty there at the end with the solo. It's not overstated, but it fits in really nicely. And I think he's another one of those guys that we talked about a couple of times, like Mike Campbell from the Heartbreakers, where it's not real flashy, but it's exactly what you need in the track.
Yeah, and I mean, look, Rutherford is not Steve Hackett as a guitar player. But he is a very fine guitar player. He's certainly a competent guitar player. That you're right, he puts in what is needed to the song. Plus, if they need something else, they can always get Daryl Sterner to kind of pop something in there. But I think they're pretty adamant about, we'll make all the music, and then we need those other guys to tour. So I'll put in the bass, I'll put in the guitar, and then to do it live, yes, we need Daryl who can switch back and forth also, and we need Chester on the drums. But yeah, I mean, that's what they are. They're musicians, and they do all this. The B-side was, in the UK, it was Taking It All Too Hard, which we'll get to here in a bit. In the US, the B-side was Second Home by the Sea, which we're obviously going to get there here in a second. But it did well. It's one that kind of endures, and it's a Phil Wright, so it did well for them. Now we get into, some of the more classic kind of Genesis stuff, as far as I'm concerned, because you could take Home by the Sea and Second Home by the Sea as one suite that's kind of like 11 minutes long. They are definitely different songs. They have different rhythms. They have different chord progressions or whatever. There is a little bit at the end of Second Home by the Sea. There is a little bit of a callback to the lyrics of Home by the Sea. But breaking them in half, Home by the Sea, I always loved this song. It was kind of a deep cut on classic rock radio while we were growing up. I mean, it was a single, but it wasn't like a huge single. And to me, it was kind of it was an album cut.
Dreaming of the time we were free. So many years ago, before a time when we first heard, welcome to the Home by the Sea. Sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down.
Yeah, and it's more. This is more upbeat. It's weird because it's darker, but it's more upbeat.
Exactly.
And yeah, and they do that pretty well. Put those two together, and then you kind of have some odd lyrics there. Like, what is he really talking about? There's some deal about how it's a story about a guy who breaks into a house,
right,
and it's haunted. Okay.
And then the ghosts hold him there and tell him all about their lives. And
But it's interesting because I was thinking about when I was reading that and then listening to the song, I was kind of thinking about Neil from Def Lepp podcast and about what he was saying about growing up in Liverpool and having all the old guys tell him about, how great the Beatles were. I kind of got that, like, we live our lives through what we tell you. Like, okay, we've heard these stories a million times. Thanks. No one cares anymore.
Right. Well, I mean, here's the thing. It may not have really been, I mean, it was a single, I guess, with Home by the Sea on the front and Second Home by the Sea on the back. But it was like released in the Netherlands, or it was, and then it hit the charts in New Zealand and Australia in like 86, 87, kind of after Invisible Touch had come out and had all that run. And then like, well, we got another one for you. And it is good. And I feel like it was heard on the radio some, but it was never on the charts, certainly not in America or the UK in the 83, 84 time frame. But you're right. I mean, I think it's a great composition. It's got great music in it. And then his singing is someone help me, get me out of here. And it's like, it's supposed to be scary, but it's also, it's like you say, it's upbeat and you can sing along to it. And it's got good progressions. Like, this is just a really good song. It's just an odd topic,
Yeah. I mean, I don't write songs, so I don't know how it goes, but to put those things together and make it work. And you're right. It's cool when maybe you're not super familiar with a record and you get to something like this and you say, wow, how come I've never heard this before? Why don't I hear this more? Because this could, I mean, it was a single, but this should have been on the radio more. The only thing I really ever remember hearing from this record at the time was That's All.
I'm totally with you.
Yeah,
absolutely, 100% with you in America, and that was the case. Now, they did play this on their last tour. I mean, I think they kind of continue to play this quite a bit, and they played them both. They played Home by the Sea, and then they went straight into Second Home by the Sea. And on the screens behind them, they kind of had like a ghostly chateau, like by the sea there, kind of green, kind of thing there, which fits better for the second part of it, I feel like. And you see it as one suite, see it as one 11-minute song. It's pretty good. I liked it. I liked the whole thing. I mean, I like the first part a heck of a lot better, but I think it's cool that they still kind of honored them both and put them both together as one suite of music. Plus, Phil doesn't have to sing as much during the second part, right? So that gives him a little time to take a break, take a sip of water, pop a pain pill, whatever he's got to do. While you've got this screen going on and you've got Tony being able to do his thing and kind of show off a little bit. So I like it. And these are Tony Banks written songs, at least the lyrics. So you know that Tony's going to get his stuff into the show.
Images of sorrow, pictures of delight, things that go to make up a life.
But that's side one. Now, I've only ever had it on CD here. I got it used some years ago because I'm like, this has got good stuff on it. And it's got the Home by the Sea suite on it. I want to have
I think I was in the same boat. It was one of those, you're kind of just bebopping through the store and you're like, is Genesis like, on the $4.99 rack? I've got to have a copy of that.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think I got it used, but I mean, why not? I mean, if you can get that for $5, you should absolutely pick that up, But
now, granted, it wasn't like the super deluxe version, or it was the one where you pull it out and you pull the little booklet out and it's only got 2 pages and it's just the black and white stuff on the inside. So you're buying it just for the music, but I'll take it.
That's right. But these two songs, the Home by the Sea, it was kind of like a microcosm of the transition from prog to pop. It's like you take them all as a suite, the two as a suite. All right, that's an 11-minute song. It's got these different changes and all that kind of stuff in it. But the first part, Home by the Sea, is kind of poppy. Even though it's kind of got this dark undertone to it, it's very poppy, and it's got some hooks in it. It's something you would expect to hear on the radio. Anyway, going on to side 2. Now, this is where you find all the Mike Rutherford penned lyrics on 4 of these 5, including the first one, Illegal Alien.
Yes.
Now, I kind of actually do remember this song a little bit. It was not a huge hit, but you did hear it on the radio a bit, and it went to 44 on the Hot 100, which means you heard it. Whereas in the UK, it got to 46, which our friend Neil will tell you if it doesn't get to top 40, you didn't hear it, and you certainly didn't see the video. It's supposed to be fun, right? I mean, it's like, they basically wrote it based on the fact that, they were having troubles securing their visas and stuff to like tour or whatever. They put Turn It On Again live as the B-side, which Turn It On Again is my favorite like latter-day Genesis song, or the pop Genesis stuff. So it's like, all right, that's cool. Put that back out there, So it's like the fourth, I guess, single that came out from it, released in early 84. Funny little video, but I think they got some flack for it.
I would imagine so. And when you look at it now, it's a little on the cringy side. Like, I understand it's supposed to be tongue in cheek. I understand it's supposed to be goofy. Even the intro is kind of goofy, with the keyboard part. But yeah, there's some stuff in there where you're like, oh, fellas, maybe we shouldn't have done that.
You're waking up from a hangover carrying a bottle of tequila. It's like, yeah.
And then you've got Phil Collins. Like, are we trying to have like a Hispanic Mexican accent singing this? And it's like, oh.
And they have their little mustaches on in the video. It's like, what are you trying to be, Speedy Gonzalez? This is kind of ridiculous. So. I love that Blender listed Illegal Alien as the 13th worst song of all time.
Well, I noticed too that if you watch the video, they leave out a refrain from one of the choruses where he's talking about like his sister will do whatever it takes to get him across the border or something like that. Like, oh, geez.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably just done in bad taste, but I mean, they got hammered for it. Like the Tampa Bay Times said it was ridiculous and asked if it was one of the most racist songs of the 80s. Reader's Digest included Illegal Alien on a list of racist songs, which is not good. It proves that undervaluing Mexicans has been an American theme for decades. Well, they're English, so don't blame us Americans.
Yeah.
The San Antonio Current, where you used to live, says it goes full-on racist and tackles every Hispanic stereotype that exists. So probably not a great look for them.
Yeah, in hindsight, you might want to take that back.
But the thing is, these are white people complaining about, I mean, did any illegal aliens complain about it? No, because if they did, then we kicked them out for being illegal aliens. So, sorry, it's like, it's wrong, but it's like, I don't want to hear from the white people. If the illegal aliens want to tell me that it's wrong, they can come and tell me that it's wrong, and then I'll have INS take them back to Mexico.
Thank you for filing the complaint.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Just walk down here. Everything's going to be fine. But it's not a great song, and obviously the concept is wrong.
The one thing that struck me too is that the lyrics are kind of shoehorned into the melody. A lot of them, it doesn't really go together. They do it a lot better in a couple of other tracks on this song, but it just sounds like you wrote these probably independently, and the refrains just don't fit in there for me anyway.
Yeah, and did Phil play a little trumpet in the bridge or in the? I don't know.
Someone did, or maybe it was a keyboard. I don't know.
But it's just it was only played live in its entirety during the Mama tour, which was the tour off this album. So I think they got the hint eventually that this is not one you need to kind of continue to do.
Hi, this is Jim McCarthy of the Yardbirds, and you're listening to the Ugly American Werewolf in London.
But then the next song, Taking It All Too Hard, again, what is this, the fifth single off the album? Unbelievable. You have 9 songs off the album. More than half of them are released as singles over the course of a year. And you know that's powerful, man, because you usually have a single that comes out before the album comes out in October of 83. Or is it, when was this released?
This was October, I think.
Yeah, October 3rd of 83. More than half the songs are singles, and this is probably what Mutt Lange was seeing when he's talking to Def Leppard. Like, look, this Pyromania album, we'll get you 3, maybe 4 singles, but the next one, we got to do 5, 6, 7 singles, which is what Steve Clark started like wringing his hands over, like, oh my God, how are we going to make 5 or 6? I better go drink a bottle of vodka to calm down. But this is kind of that classic 80s Genesis soft rock. Like you hear this on the rock station, but you'd also hear this on adult contemporary, right? Like it's a little soft. Now, I think it's a very nice song, but I mean, I wouldn't rock out to it. But when it comes on, I'm like, yeah, I know this one. This is pretty good.
What I like about this song is it's kind of starts off a little on the bland and generic side, but when Collins comes in with those vocals, he really steps up and sings his face off on this deal. And anybody who, Phil, can he really sing? Yeah, he can really sing. He's killing it on this track.
You're taking it all too hard. You're taking it all too hard. Oh no, not this confused again. No, not the same mistakes again. You're taking it all too hard. You're taking it all too hard.
Yeah. No, he does great. And Tony does very nice work on his Yamaha on this one. I mean, this is a very nice song, but like I said, 50 on the Hot 100, but 11 on adult contemporary, because when you just want that mellow drive home, this is perfect, but what are they taking too hard? I mean, what's the subject of it? No video for it. But it was released, and Silver Rainbow, which is also which we're going to get to here, which is coming up, is the B-side. I think Just a Job to Do is the only song that was not released as a single or a B-side off the album. Everything else was a single or a B-side.
Which it totally could have.
Yeah, and I know because they played it on the radio anyway. It's like, how do I know this? They didn't release this. I'm like, oh yeah, they played this on the radio. I heard it, and it's pretty good. I like it. But no, Taking It All Too Hard. Yeah, you recognize this, but I feel like this is one of those that you don't know if it's Genesis or Phil Collins. Like, especially right away, you know what I mean?
Correct. And that's one of the things that always kind of sticks with me. I saw 2 seconds of an interview with Tony Banks, and he was talking about this time, and he's, it's hard to really put your finger on who the creative force in the band was. Really, Tony? Because I was talking to my wife about this. Like, you can play the game. Is this a Phil Collins song or is this a Genesis song? And there's a lot of them, especially like you said, this one. It's going to be tough. Is this one of his or is this one of the Genesis songs? Because you can definitely feel his pop influence coming into the band now.
That's right. And so Tony's sticking up for himself. I know.
Oh, of course. I understand. He's not going to be like, yeah, we totally took a back seat. I understand he's not going to say that, but still, like, do you really believe that? Or you just, that's the stiff upper lip?
Yeah, exactly. So this is, to me, but Mike wrote the lyrics for this. They all wrote the music together. That's great. It kind of endures. I don't know if they played it a whole lot. I mean, I'm sure they played it on the Mama tour. I don't know if they played it a whole lot in years since, but yeah, to me, it's like, it's exactly that. Like, you take 3 or 4 Phil Collins albums and then you take the 80s Genesis. And this is one of the ones where if you didn't know for sure, unless you're a hardcore fan, you would say, oh, that's Phil Collins. Like, no, that's Genesis. All right. Moving on to song number 3, Just a Job to Do. Now, this is, like I said, this is like the one that didn't get released as a single somehow, but I like this one. This is actually pretty good. So it's kind of got that fast-paced keyboard at the front of it there.
Yeah.
The bang, 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 down they go.
Yeah, and the nice guitar part too.
Yeah.
Underneath it, and it's this is probably the most upbeat, most rocking tune they've got on here. I don't know why they didn't release it as a single or make a video, because I mean, I can already picture what's going on in my head. It's some greasy private eye looking for somebody. Not really a whole lot. The lyrics aren't super deep, but it's a nice story song.
Yeah, and he's really belting it out here, Phil. I mean,
Yeah.
I got a name and I got a number. Yeah, I guess it's kind of a private eye kind of thing is what the theme of it is. Pretty darn good song if you ask me. Now, you can't release everything as a single. I would have released this before Illegal Alien. I mean, I understand they're trying to have a little bit of fun, but it just seems like someone should have tapped him on the shoulders. Like, first of all, this song is weird. Secondly, some people might not like it, but then we didn't really have sensitivity to anybody other than ourselves back in the early 80s. I don't feel like,
No, it's a joke. Come on.
especially English
will
people,
laugh.
right? You know,
Yeah.
It's like you're all beneath us anyway, so it doesn't really matter what color your skin is. Or where you're from. So, you're all peasants as far as we're concerned. But just a job to do. The Hard On You has good transitions in it. I'm like, this is a really good, this is a really good
nice
song.
chorus. It's a nice bridge, everything in there. And I couldn't believe it was not ever used in Miami Vice, but it was used in another show.
Oh,
It
yeah?
was the intro to, I think it was only a 13 episode deal. It was a Miami Vice ripoff called The Insiders. I'm like, I know I've heard this before.
Really?
It was about, I think they were supposed to be like newspaper reporters or something. It never got picked up, but I just remember that. I just remember watching the intro to that show. I don't think I ever watched the show one time. I'm like, but I love this song.
Right.
And that was a way you could hear it.
Interesting. All right. Well, that's good deep background that I didn't have. That's pretty awesome.
And one of the it was the white guy and the black guy, just like Miami Vice,
Just
and
like Crockett and Tubbs.
correct. Except for the Tubbs in this show was my cousin Stoney Jackson.
Nice, Tony.
Yeah, correct. So shout out to the extended family here.
Absolutely. So that was a Banks lyric, right? But and you get it on rock radio here in America. So it's kind of like this thing is unstoppable. I mean, of course, what did Invisible Touch come out? Was it 86? It was 86.
Okay.
So that's a few years. That's a long time. But I mean, they had singles coming out for a whole year from late, 83 all the way through the summer of 84. Plus you got this one doing well on its own, just a job to do on rock radio. So they kind of, they stretch it out a little bit more. And then of course, when
No Jacket Required
comes out, that skyrockets. And that, I guess, helps Genesis. I mean, do you think that helps Genesis or hurts them? I feel like it helps them.
I feel like it helps it too, because the songs are so much the same or in the similar vein. Like if you like Face Value, you'd like this record. If you like, if you like No Jacket Required, you'd like this. It's I think it helps them in the sales.
I think so too, although eventually it would create backlash because look, the record industry, the industry executives, maybe in like the 60s or early 70s, they knew something about music. They were young. They knew what was coming up and that kind of thing. By the time you got to like the late 70s and into the early 80s, all the original folks were too old to kind of know what's going on. And it all became very copycat. So it's like, oh, you guys like punk? Okay, let's get rid of all that prog stuff and everything's punk. It's like, and then it kind of became new wave. And then it's like, oh, you guys like hair metal? Let's sign every single hair metal band there is. So much so that by the end of the 80s, you're sick of it. And then in the early 90s, you have to have grunge to get rid of it. Oh, you don't like that anymore? Okay, let's kill off all the hair metal bands. Let's just sign every single grunge band. And then you get sick of that, and it has to go to something else. So it's like executives aren't too bright. They're like, oh, the morons out there like this, let's give them as much of this as they can stomach, right? And so that's what happened with Phil Collins and Genesis. Oh, you like Phil Collins? All right, well, he's going to have 5 singles off his solo album, and then in a year and a half, we're going to have 5 singles off a Genesis album, and then we're going to let him do a soundtrack, but he's going to do Against All Odds during this time. He's going to do the White Nights, song, whatever it was. Not White Nights, but it was a duet he did with that girl that was...
Oh yeah, it was a separate lives.
Separate lives, yeah.
And I think that was from White Nights.
Exactly. Yeah. Separate Lives comes out, and it's like, oh, Philip Bailey from Earth, Wind and Fire wants to do a solo album. Well, let's put Phil Collins on there with him. It'll be better than Ebony and Ivory, and it was, it's like, God, they just put him into everything. It's like, okay, this works. Let's sell the snot out of this till people are so sick of it. Till the time we get to the 90s, like Phil Collins is a meme before we knew what a meme was. Like people, there's so much backlash. Oh, it's all so cheesy and it's all the same. I'm like, well, you kept buying it. You
did for about a solid 10, 12 years. You did love him, and he was all over the place, and parlayed that into other acting roles. So yeah. I mean, you can't argue with success. You can't argue with over 100 million sales of his solo stuff alone.
For both, right?
Yeah.
This is a question that I ask, and people usually get the first two, and they never get the third. It's like there are 3 artists who sold 100 million records with their original band and 100 million as a solo artist, and that includes singles and everything. Like, who are they? And people always get Paul McCartney,
right? And
they usually get Michael Jackson, and they never get Phil Collins. And it's true.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, he's got hundreds of millions of dollars. He doesn't really care what you think anymore. Although he does. I've seen him get a little butthurt, and he will attack people in the press, especially in England where the press is just a little nastier. He can get a little nasty back, and because the press, like, we're the nasty ones, you don't get to be nasty, then they really attack him, So, like, seriously, Phil Collins is, people in America are like, oh, yeah, he's cheesy, but, like, people in the UK are like, screw him, kind of thing. Wow. Plus, he moved to he lived in America for a while, and people didn't like that. He moved to Switzerland basically for tax purposes. Mm. They never like that, although all the rich English people do it. So I don't know what their problem is. But anyway, moving on to Silver Rainbow. Now, this was actually Tony Banks is the one he wrote on this side. It was originally called Adam because it kind of sounded like something Adam Ant would do, I guess, in their mind. I had never heard this one before I bought the record. It's to me, this is very early 80s. Like if you just gave me the dates, like, all right, this either came off of Invisible Touch in 86 or Genesis in 83. Which one was it? Like, obviously Genesis in 83, because by 86, the music had changed. This is very, with the keyboards and stuff, this is very early 80s to me.
And the sun should turn to blue, and you keep on going, 'cause you're on nowhere. Ooh, then you know that you are there. Beyond the silver rain, the silver rainbow. You won't know if you're coming or going.
To me, this sounds like maybe an old song that they had lying around that they kind of jazzed up for the early 80s. This is the most leftover proggy style in the whole album.
You think so?
I kind of think like that's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like this was an idea maybe that they had that it's not going to work on the record, but here, if we change it up a little bit, that's what it sounds like to me. It also kind of sounds like in a couple of the refrains, he sounds a lot like Peter Gabriel on one or two of the real quick.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, to me anyway.
Well, then that's probably informing the way you describe it as well, right? If you're hearing Pete, then you're like, it automatically takes you like 73 or whatever. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, I like it. I mean, it's the B-side to Taking It All Too Hard. It's probably not one that I would search out. Ooh, I want to listen to Silver Rainbow today. It fits in, I think, on the album, but it fits the time more than it fits the album to me.
Yeah. And now I'm kind of biased going through and listening to these people talk about producing records, about where you and how you sequence and like, oh, you put your weak stuff almost at the end of the second side. So
right.
Like, is that what this is? Or are you trying to sneak this in right before the end of this, or what's going on here?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like we had 5 singles on the album. Can't even fit them all on the first side, so yeah, and this is a B-side. We'll just kind of squeeze it in here at the end. And it's going to get better. The last song, which is Rutherford again, my notes were, Very 80s schlock. Sounds like the end roll credits to a bad 80s rom-com. Like, at the end, they decide, oh, you know what? We really do love each other. And they make out in the office building or, as the kids are going crazy around them or whatever. And then the credits roll and then this song comes on. I don't love this one. This is definitely like, we had better songs and Phil's got better songs on his solo records. We even put a few good songs out on a EP last year. So it's like, we're just rounding this out. We're getting it to 46 minutes and we'll see you on tour.
Yeah. You're talking about the 80s rom-com or, he grabs her from the wedding and they drive off in the convertible because they're really in love. Yeah. Something like that. The groove, it's got kind of a fat bass groove and that's nice, but yeah, the lyrics are generic. They don't really mean anything. You just kind of put them in there.
Exactly.
And again, I'm biased now too, because this is the last song. Is this something that you just kind of buried? They won't even get to this anyway, so who cares?
Hands in the air, don't care. Just what they're saying. Hold on. Just keep on hoping against hope that it's gonna get better. Don't worry, there's no hurry for you, for me. Everything's gonna come around. Shout out.
Yeah, pretty much. That's the way I look at it. When you have such strong stuff, or at least popular stuff, up front, it's all front loaded.
I think it's actually tough with an album like this when you have, if like say you bought this late, like we're still talking 83, 84, but you bought this late and you heard all the singles. It's hard to sneak anything else in there because you're like, I'm just want to go through and listen to the singles that I know.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas if you only had like one or two, maybe you listen to the rest of the record and kind of give it a chance. But now you're like, nah, skip. I'm done. Let's go back to the beginning.
Probably so. And then they did a successful tour and then they had to take some time off. And then Mike went and did Mike and the Mechanics, so it's like, and Tony, I'm sure worked on some stuff, and so, yeah, man. I mean, this is setting them up for great success. Well, they've already had great success. This is 4 million in the US by itself, but this is kind of wedged in between Phil went on to do No Jacket Required. Sorry, face value was 81. He went on to do No Jacket Required, and that's one of the biggest albums of the 80s. I mean, 25 million sold worldwide, 12 million in the US alone, 2 million in the UK, which at the time meant like 1 in every 25 people had one. And it went to number 1 in the US, the UK, Switzerland, Sweden, Spain, Norway, New Zealand, Germany, the Netherlands, Canada, top 10 almost everywhere else. It's like you couldn't get away from Phil Collins at this point. And it had, what did it have, 5 singles on it, I think?
I think so, yeah.
Or at least 4. It's Susudio, One More Night, Don't Lose My Number, and Take Me Home. But I think there might be one more that we know for one reason or another. But anyway, I mean, that's huge.
Yeah, he had 4 singles off of that. But if you're talking about that, so you had one in January, 2 in January, July, 2 in January and 2 in July. So basically you had half a year of putting these things out and it just keeps rolling. And then for Genesis, you roll into Invisible Touch, which I'm trying to find where the sales of this are. But this was even bigger than the Genesis record.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, Invisible Touch, I think, was like 16 million, something like that. Worldwide, something like that. And it's like, good Lord, man. So if you go from this little Genesis record, which only sold about 7 or 8 million, copies, then you go to your solo album, which ends up doing 25 million. Then you go to Invisible Touch, which was 6 million in the US. Plus you're on both coasts of the world for Live Aid, plus you end up on Miami Vice, plus. It's like the guy was minting money, but he was working hard for it. I got to give him credit, because like he's working on Robert Plant solo albums. And he also did, the US port of Robert's first tour as a solo artist, He's doing the thing with Philip Bailey. He's doing stuff for soundtracks. He's doing solo albums that sell incredibly well. He's doing these Genesis albums and tours that go incredibly well. It's not like he was Jimmy Page is just sitting home collecting money because Led Zeppelin still sells and is still playing on the radio. He's out there earning it, man. I mean, give him a little credit.
Yeah. And you're talking about Miami Vice on that one episode, like he was the featured. He wasn't on for 2 seconds, like, hey, there's that guy, and then he walks off. I mean, he was the main character of that episode. And then
Phil the Shill, man.
Yeah.
And he had his song Rat Race on it, life is a rat race, chasing easy money. And also had Emo Phillips, the weirdo comedian, on there. Is the guy they duped on the show so Stan wouldn't win. So yeah. But, look, this is just an interesting inflection point in the history of Genesis, especially as this huge pop band, because from 78 to 82, they were gaining momentum, right? And every album did a little bit better. Face Value comes out in 81. It pops Phil Collins up. Hello, I Must Be Going comes up. It pops him up more. But then this is the inflection point where Genesis is doing well. They're still the big band. But then when No Jacket Require comes out, now it's like Phil doesn't even have to do Genesis anymore. It's better to take 100% of Phil Collins than a third of Genesis. And it might even be better to do a third of Phil Collins than a third of Genesis, to be honest with you. But Invisible Touch is huge. I mean, it's just this huge run, and it's kind of part of this Phil Collins ubiquity that a lot of people eventually got very tired of.
Right. And that does stink because, he was so successful that people got sick of him. Okay, well, that sounds like sour grapes. But when you think about it, he was a guy who they picked up to be the drummer of this band in 1970?
70, I think. 70 or 71, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so he's playing the drums. The guy, your main guy decides he doesn't want to do it anymore. You recruit him to do the singing. And then from then on, it becomes even bigger. There aren't really many bands that have ever done that before. Have made this pretty radical change from this prog all-stars to mainstream success, over the top 100 million sales. I don't think that you can really discount that.
I totally agree. And it's probably part of why Tony is still a little bent out of shape about it, because he was a founder of the band with Pete and Mike and, went to Charterhouse together, like mates since they're teenagers. They bring this guy in and he's the drummer. Yes, he can help write the songs and he is a fine singer. He can do some backup. But then once he's out front, it's kind of like this guy I brought in is now bigger than I am in my band.
Yeah, right.
And that's weird.
Yeah. And then you do these tours, and are they showing up to just see Phil Collins? Like if Genesis had swapped out the other two guys, would anybody really have known in the mainstream ticket buying populace in 1983? Probably not.
Probably not. So people have divided opinion on Genesis' 1983 self-titled album Genesis with the big hits That's All, Mama, Home by the Sea. A good album, a popular album, and was this really the full-on death knell here of the end of the prog Genesis? I know you put Home by the Sea and Second Home by the Sea together. It's one big long song. It's a suite. I get it. But for all the prog head Genesis fans from the 70s, were they already like, this is no longer my band? Did it start in 1978 with And Then There Were Three and just gradually got to this point? Or was this one like, okay, now they've really changed. They're not the same band and I'm not going to support them, which probably didn't bother the guys that much because now they've got millions more supporting them around the world. So you trade one set of loyal fans for a set of, well, maybe not so loyal, but a big, big crowd. I don't know. But having Phil Collins sing and help write these songs was huge for them. And it was huge for his solo time as well. I mean, this run in 1980 to 1986, 87, 88 for Phil was unbelievable. Yes, a lot of people think he's cheesy now in retrospect. And I think the industry is to blame. Phil probably is a bit to blame for never saying no, but at any rate, I think you have to respect the guy. There's some great songs on here. Maybe a lot of them do fall into that adult contemporary, not cool hard rock like we usually talk about on this show. But growing up in the 80s, you couldn't get away from this stuff. And this album, the 1983 Genesis album, to me is very interesting because it's a very precise point in the trajectory of both Phil Collins and Genesis. And it turns 40, and we wanted to share our thoughts with you here on the show. So, as usual, we want to know, folks, did we get something right? Did we get something wrong? Did we miss the point? Did we leave out your favorite part? And I know I screwed up some of Phil Collins' solo albums when I was talking about them. I'm sorry about that. Would like to shout out to Marilyn Martin, who Phil Collins sang Separate Lives with from the White Knight soundtrack. But you got to let us know. You got to let us know when we screw up. And sometimes Jackson knows what I'm talking about, even when I'm saying the wrong thing. And he doesn't stop me because he gets it. But we know sometimes it doesn't always translate to you guys. So call us on our shit, guys. It's uglyamericanwerewolf@gmail.com, or you can tweet us, DM us at ugly_werewolf or at actionjack72. You let us know what we screwed up, but you can also let us know the bands, the albums, the concerts, the DVDs, the books, the rock properties that you want to hear us talk about. And make sure that you all go out and visit rarevinyl.com wherever you are, you record collectors. And they've got a lot of Genesis stuff from over the years. Go to the site, use the one-time code UGLY, save yourself 10%. They ship all around the world. Thank you to Pantheon Pods for helping us put this together. And thank you for listening. It really means the world to us. I know we do a lot of diverse kind of stuff on here, and we appreciate you taking the journey with us. So please download and subscribe. And if you're thinking about it, guys, go ahead and give us a positive review wherever you download and subscribe. It's huge for us. It helps us grow the show, find more rock and rollers like you. And if you let us know about it, we'll probably read it on the show. Now, in the near future, we've got some more fun, cool stuff lined up for you. And of course, we have some big records celebrating big anniversaries that we're going to want to talk about. No spoilers. You're just going to have to tune in next time. But until next time, to all you rockers all around the world, be cool and keep doing what you do to keep rock alive.